as I mentioned before, you'll see that this is pretty uniform. If you want random, okay, and a lot of times that's what you do want is some random placement or random movement, whatever it may be. You won't be able to do that within the manager on your own. You have to get a little bit of help for the Mograph object. You got to come up here to the Mograph menu, and probably the most frequently used effector would be the random effector. This effector's goal is to add randomness to the object that you're attaching it to. So if you want to have random placement for the clones, random sizes for the clones, random rotation for the clones, random animation for it, you could use a random effector. So you go up to the menu, you go click on the random effector. Okay, again, it's not going to do anything unless you hook those up. So people are usually inclined to parent these together, since that's what they did with the original setup, the cloner object and the object that you're cloning. Effectors don't quite work like that. You have to go to the Mograph object, and again, like I mentioned before, there's a tab all the way at the end here called Effectors. Okay, this is where you're going to put it. Okay, now you might be wondering why mine is already in there. Okay, what happens is if you happen to have the cloner or the Mograph object highlighted when you go to the effector and click on it, it will automatically put it down here. But if you don't and nothing is selected, you go to Mograph menu, click on random, it's not going to automatically link them together. So you would have to go to the cloner object, click on the effectors tab, and drag and drop the random effector in there. It's got a check mark on it, which means you can turn it on or off. You can see this is off, and you can see how they're all nicely, neatly in a line there. Each clone is a little bit different, but again, it's lined up. If I turn the random effector on, you'll see that they wiggle out of place, and each one's placement is a little bit different. Okay, so now they're hooked up together. Anything that you want to introduce that would have that random aspect to it, you have to go to the random effector. So when you click on the random effector, you'll see that it has its own options as well. So now we're looking at tons and tons of options. One that's a little tricky to have to remember where they all are, but the positive here is that when we're talking about animation, there's so much that you have the opportunity to animate, which is great. Okay, so the random effector has the basic and the coordinates tab like you've seen. It has an effectors tab, which has strength in here, a min and max, the kind of random mode that you're using. Okay, then we have parameters, which is going to let us talk about what we want the random effector to actually be affecting. So in this case, it's affecting position, but you don't have to have it do that. You can do other stuff as well. There's some weight information down here, which is definitely more intermediate, so we're not going to mess with that at this moment in time. There's a deformer tab, which you could turn on and off and choose what you want. And then there's a fall off tab. We talked about this a little bit with deformers, and you've seen them here. If you want to be able to animate the fall off rig with your effector, then you come up to the fall off tab and introduce one. I'm going to leave this alone for now because again I don't want to make this overly complicated. So I'm going to stick with the parameter tab and the effector tab. Okay, so parameters, by default it's on position. You can see that it's 50 centimeters for X, Y, and Z. That's how much random it's going to go between. So you can see here that these are all moved a little bit. They're obviously not each moved exactly 50, 50, 50. They're all getting different values of the position for X, Y, and Z. So you can make these bigger or smaller if you want to see more or less of an effect. You want it to be more or less extreme. It doesn't have to be position. You could turn position off by checking it off, and you could choose scale. And scale will let you do X, Y, and Z separately, or you could do uniform scale, and that will let you put a number in here, like say I put 5. Okay, that's very big, obviously, so maybe I'll go back to like 3, and you'll be getting randomly your scale, it will be uniform, so X, Y, and Z will be manipulated together, but you'll see that the clone size will be jumping all over the place. But you will not get any distortion between the shapes that you'll see if you just do the scale individually as X, Y, and Z. Okay, and then we also have rotation, and we can introduce random rotation here as well. Okay, now by default it's not animated. Okay, and I'm going to actually switch on all three of them. Maybe not the scale. I'll put the scale back to 1, okay, because it's too much. Okay, so you could have all three of them on. You could keyframe them, up to you what you want to use and what not. But by default, this is what the random effector is going to be looking at. It's going to have transform, and it's going to look to randomize the position, the scale, and the rotation. Okay, you could certainly have it work on other aspects, but that's currently, when you come into your parameters tab, those are the main functions of the random effector. Okay, now you could also go to the effector tab. Okay, and this is again an interesting one that you could keyframe, and I will keyframe it for you. I'm going to put this to 60. Okay, and then at 0, I'm going to keyframe the strength 0%. And at 60, I'm going to keyframe the strength at 100%. Keyframe. Okay, and now if I hit play, I get to watch those random values animate. So you can control how much those transform options that you set in the parameter tab, you can decide how much they're going to affect your clones in this case. Now you could apply the random effector to any of the other Mograph objects. It doesn't have to be the cloner, but in this case we're using the cloner, so we are applying the random positioning, scaling, and rotation to each of those clones, and the strength is going to determine how much you want that to affect those clones. Okay, now an interesting thing that you could do is you can come down here to the random mode, and you can switch this as well. If you put noise, then you will introduce a different kind of movement. And if you, I don't know if you guys have been introduced to anything that has noise in it before, but noise is just going to be like random values that it's going to be able to apply to the motion. Noise is always going to be animated, so even if I didn't have the strength here on, and if I took the keyframes off, okay, and I put the strength at 100, okay, and I left it on noise, it's still going to animate. Okay, that random mode noise is going to, every frame is going to be generated random values that it can then use to move around. So the random mode noise, I wanted to point it out because it sort of automatically animates. Okay, the sort of con there is that they are random values that sort of cinema is spitting out, so you don't have much control over that. If you see parts that you don't really like, it's hard to be able to go into those specific spots and try and take care of them because of how the sheer randomness of this particular mode. And then you have other ones. Each one of them looks a little bit different, but you'll see that these ones you're going to be keyframing them because they're not going to, all of them are not going to be automatically animated. But the ones you do have is turbulence, which is definitely going to look a lot more jittery. And then you have noise, which has sort of a more loopy, floaty feel to it right now. And then sorted is a completely different mode. You can ignore that one for now because that's going to involve particular setup for that to work. Okay, so that's the basics of the random effector. I'm going to keep using it throughout these examples. It's the one effector I plan on sticking with to show you how all these particular Mograph objects that I mentioned, how they work. And again, because you're probably going to find yourself wanting to use the random frequently. So the important thing here is that when you pull the random effector out, you have to connect it to your Mograph object. So it's got to get into this menu somehow. Either you have the object highlighted when you click on it, and then it will go in there automatically, or you're going to bring it into your object manager and you're going to drag and drop it into this box here. If it doesn't end up in this box, then even if you're setting the random objects up here, if you don't have them connected within the cloner object, then you're not going to see any effect of what you set up within the random effectors settings. Okay, and the important ones here that you'll want to start out with is the parameter tabs, where you could decide if you want to do position, scale, or rotation, one each, or a mix of them, or all of them, how much you want those random values to the scale or the range basically that you want the random values to go on. So here it's going to go from like 0 to 50 centimeters. It might also go negative. It's hard to know right now without looking at actually like the numbers of where it's sitting each frame. But you're giving it a range there for it to sort of bounce along. Okay, and then the other important thing is the Effector tab, where you can keyframe or you can adjust the strength to decide how much, how strong the range is going to be that it's going to be using. So if you want 100% of this range, that's what you should do for strength. If you want to sort of tone it down, then you can lower that. Okay, and then again, the random mode is on random, but you can choose the other ones. And if you want to introduce sort of automatic animation, some jittering and bouncing and whatnot, then you have the noise mode and you have the turbulence mode. Okay, so that's the basics of the cloner. That's the basics of the random effector. So definitely you should try and make your own. Super useful again for modeling and animating. So you definitely want to try the cloner. Definitely try the random effector. See how it goes. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about the other two. So I want to show you Motex, and then I also want to show you Motex combined with the random effector. And then I'm going to do the same thing, fracture, and then show you fracture with the random effector. So that way it's consistent that you're seeing the same effector and you're seeing how each one of these objects are different from each other. And then obviously you're getting practice with the random effector because it's a very important one.